Welcome back to On the Fly. We're previewing the predicting and recapping World Junior Championships, our Men's World Championships, the Women's World Championship, the U18 Men's World Championship. Expect the unexpected.
Absolute abomination of the Canadian Junior Nationals.
I have a couple extra words I want to use in that one. And it's Freebird. Freebird, Freebird, Freebird. Of course, the Olympics are just around the corner. I'm going to coin it the Rivalry Day.
World Junior history!
Your home for international hockey. This is On the Fly. Hello everyone and welcome back to On the Fly, your home for international hockey. I'm your host Parker McLean and you're listening to episode number 3 of the On the Fly International Hockey Podcast. Today we're going to be diving into some trends from the lower division tournaments, looking at some of the biggest rivalries in international hockey, and answering your live questions towards the end of the program. If you're hanging out with us live on YouTube today, thank you for being here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon, depending on where you are watching from. Be sure to smash that like button, hit the subscribe button to join our international community. If you're catching us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a follow and a 5-star rating, which helps us grow into one of the biggest hockey podcasts out there. You can also find us on Instagram, X, and TikTok at OnTheFly1515. But with that, we'll hop into it today, starting with our first topic of the day with Uzbekistan's goal. And for Uzbekistan, coming into these tournaments, obviously a lower division team, we've seen them kind of be recently into the IIHF as a full member back in October of 2025. But where it really starts to get interesting for them is they have set out this goal, and this goal to make the Olympic Games in 2030. And so it might be a bit of a stretch, I'd say. And I'm not going to go out there and say publicly that Uzbekistan's guaranteed to make this Olympic game run. But you look at what they've been doing over the last few years, a brand new rink, a big rink, a huge investment for them over in Tashkent, which is their capital. And it's the Humo Tashkent Arena, and it's a really big opportunity for them to continue growing their program. We've seen quite a few players play for their local team, and it's a huge opportunity, right? An $175 million investment. The arena hosts up to 12,500 spectators. And so it's the way to kind of, and it's their platform to grow the global game. And I think in many ways, that's where for Uzbekistan, it's a huge opportunity for them. We'll see whether or not they are going to be able to hit their goal. I think, yes, it is a bit of a long shot for sure. But you think about kind of where they're at, and they have some players now. They're starting to build up the capability to do it. And I think there's no better place to kind of start it here with, well, what have they been doing as of late? And for Uzbekistan, especially kind of first year out in the tournaments, 2 tournaments they've been a part of, the Men's World Championship and the U18 tournament. Those are the only 2 tournaments they're currently involved in. As we look back on 2025, it was a pretty good start for them. With 2 first-place finishes, they were promoted at both the men's U18 tournament in the Division 3B level, where they did win all 5 of their games in regulation, outscoring their opponents 46-8. And so a bit of a blowout tournament to start. Obviously, when you go shift down the divisions, and with new teams coming in, you tend to get to test the waters a little bit. And for a team like Uzbekistan, that was their first test. And at the U18 level, we saw that they were going to be able to compete for years to come. And so a huge opportunity there for them to kind of get their first taste of the international hockey. And it carried through the rest of the rankings, and carried right into the Division 4 Men's World Championships from last year, where they went 4-0-1-0. Of course, with 1 shootout loss to Armenia. It was a 3-2 game. But in many ways, the Uzbeks outplayed Armenia in that game. But in the end, they won the 4 games that they needed to. They got the first spot in that Division 4 tournament, which allowed them to get promoted up to this year's Division 3B Men's World Championship, which will be coming up in just a little bit. But then you, of course, go to, well, what have they done so far this year? And it's been a pretty good start to the year with a first-place finish at the men's U18 level, of course, at the Division 3A tournament after being promoted from Division 3B U18 tournament the year before. a big performance from them. They went 4-1-0-0, 37-16 where was a goal differential for them, and so another huge performance from their team. And you started to see some players really kind of take it to that next level at this tournament, and we're starting to see a bit of that kind of foundation, if you will, start to get laid for the Uzbeks. And there's no one better to kind of start it with than Salokidin Azimov, who's been kind of that next player up for this Uzbek team. 16-year-old player currently playing out in Latvia. He's been the kind of the guy that they've went to for not necessarily just this tournament, but also the year before that, where we saw him put together a pretty good performance. 2025, 3 goals, 4 assists for 7 points in that tournament. And then this year, a bit more of that kind of star-studded approach where you relied on him to have that much more of an impact. 11 goals, 8 assists for 19 points at this year's U18 tournament. He'll be a player that they'll continue to look for at just 16 years old for future tournaments as they look to continue to move up the rankings, and as well, a lot of new crop of players will continue to cycle in, especially with this new investment into the game of hockey. We'll see whether they can attain their goal of being one of the best, if not the best, Asian hockey countries out there. The Uzbeks are a team to definitely keep an eye on, but it also extends far beyond just their young prospects. Another player who's now 18 years old, phased out of this recent U18 tournament, is Yasserba Rasmakhanov, and for him, currently playing out in the Czech U20 Extraliga, probably their best prospect overall. He's been a guy that they've looked to, especially last year, to kind of be that force, I'd say, in many ways on that forward side. You look for him, especially as these tournaments goes onwards, at the Men's World Championships in particular, to look for him to be that kind of staple piece moving forward for years to come, really, and especially for a team like Uzbekistan, who's looking to not only be competitive now, but into the future. There's a huge opportunity for a guy like Rasmakhanov to really be that next piece, that next necessary piece in many ways, to end up taking them to that next step. Definitely a guy to keep an eye on there as well. Then you kind of get into, well, who's currently good and who's currently playing for the men's national team for Uzbekistan. And there are a few that you kind of want to keep an eye on. Vadim Kravchenko is probably their best player currently right now. 2025 World Championships really led the way, 13 goals, 12 assists for 25 points, as well as Vasily Yilov, who's kind of more of that playmaker type style. 6 goals, but 19 assists at the most recent Men's World Championship, given it was the Division 4 World Championships, but at the same time, still an impressive performance. Players that they will look to really lead the way for them now and into the future. And that was kind of the World Championship side. And then as well, you can also look to their current team out in, of course, Uzbekistan with the Humo Tashkent club hockey team. And they are, once again, trying to find their way through. They're a competitive team that is getting those reps, and kind of you can compare them to a lower division type team, but still, they are getting their reps. It's kind of like what Italy's doing now, and we've seen their success over the last few months and really the last few years as they've grown their program tremendously. Uzbekistan's trying to pull off that same type of move. Yavokir Razulov as well is another player. He's 27, but the captain of their team, kind of serves as a bit of that middle ground right now between the younger players and the older players. A huge part for this Uzbek team if they want any chance of going forward into these tournaments. Definitely a player to keep an eye on, not just now, but also into the future for this team. But as far as when you look forward as to kind of what's to come for them, and there are a few things that you do want to kind of keep an eye on. Yes, we talked about a little bit already, but their Men's World Championship coming up, the Division 3B tournament, is coming up from April 13th to 19th. And so it's a huge opportunity for them, whether or not they are going to be able to kind of take it to that next step. It will be held in Hong Kong. And so kind of the teams you're looking for in this tournament, Luxembourg is the team that got demoted from last year's Division 3A tournament. We'll see whether or not they're going to be able to make their way back and continue to compete at the 3B tournament this year. North Korea, Hong Kong are kind of your two teams that I'd say are other favorites for the top spot. Mongolia and the Philippines are two other teams I'd say that as much as, yes, they will be competitive, you're looking for them to be a little bit more of that relegation type factor teams. It wouldn't surprise me to see either of those two teams end up in that relegation spot, be sent down to the Division 4 tournament, but still something to keep an eye on there. It should be quite interesting, to say the least, whether or not this Uzbek team is going to be able to find their way up. And I think kind of you look for their big games. Luxembourg is going to be a huge game for them if they want any chance at continuing to go far into this tournament, as well as North Korea is going to be a huge game for them as well. They will likely need to win both those games if they want to be promoted to the 3A tournament. Should be very exciting, to say the least. A huge opportunity for them as they continue to look to try and follow the Kazakh format. And Kazakhstan, a team and Uzbekistan is trying to follow the Kazakh format. Who for the Kazakhs, they've been a team that have been growing quite a bit over the last few years, especially on the IIHF side. And we're going to see if that can continue. And I think you look at what Uzbekistan's doing now. They've done very similar to what the Kazakhs have done. A strong U18 program, a strong men's worlds program. They have a team in Uzbekistan that plays competitively, and you grow your players within the country. So we'll see whether or not those steps are going to lead them to a potential part where what we've seen so far from Kazakhstan is that kind of success, and we'll see if Uzbekistan can follow it. A huge opportunity for them, and now it's just about seizing the opportunity. But that will do it for our first segment for Uzbekistan's goal of the Olympic Games. We will now shift over to our second topic of today with Estonia's Women's World Championship run. And for Estonia, a huge win for them at the most recent Women's World Championship Division 3B tournament. And we take a quick look back as to kind of what they've been doing in that tournament. Obviously, a really impressive performance, a huge 7-0 win over South Africa to kick off the tournament, then a tightly contested game between Israel, a 4-1 win for them, really helped to secure their top spot promotion. Then you go to the next game, and this was kind of those opening 3 games were the key to success for Estonia if they wanted to end up getting that promotional spot. A huge win against Bosnia to more or less secure their fate, a 3-1 win at that. Then, of course, they pick up the remains, beating Singapore 14-1, the Philippines 9-0. And when you got to that point, wasn't much of a contention point, right? And you knew coming in that as soon as Estonia were to get those points, it was likely going to end well for them. And so, yes, you pick up the remains with Philippines and Singapore, but you won those first 3 games, and that was the key to the success for Estonia. But you talk about this tournament, and it was a dominant one at that. And, of course, you pick up all 15 points in the standings, but at the same time, it's also about how you pick up those 15 points. And you outscore your opponents 37-3, a huge statement win in most of those games as well. Big wins, of course, against Bosnia and Israel to really secure their fate, but also the fact that they weren't going to let some of the weaker teams like the Philippines and like Singapore climb back into games and kind of make it more interesting than it probably shouldn't have been. But promotion has been a bit of a ride for this Estonian team. And you look back over the last few years as well, and you kind of look, 2022 promoted to the division, or they won the Division 3B tournament, promoted to the 3A tournament in their first attempt since basically COVID. 2023 sent back down to the Division 3A level. They became 6th place, sent down to the Division 3B level. Then 2024 was kind of the start of, they were right around that promotional spot, but never quite were able to kind of get over that hump and finally get there. A 2nd place finish at the Division 3B tournament in 2024, a 3rd place finish in 2025, which then of course leads us to the 2026 tournament, which is what we saw this year, of course, in that promotional spot, picking up all 15 of the points available and really doing it in dominant fashion. Then we look ahead and kind of what's to come for them as we shift to our overall rankings is, of course, well, you get to that point And now it's what's to come for next year's tournament. And yes, they're going to climb up into that Division 3A tournament. This year we saw Romania promoted from that tournament, Bulgaria relegated from that tournament, which means that we're going to see Thailand, Turkey, Croatia, and Serbia at the Division 3A level next year, joined with the Estonian team who was promoted. And then it's going to be a matter of, well, who gets relegated from the Division 2B tournament, whether it be Mexico, New Zealand, Ukraine, Belgium, Hong Kong, and Lithuania. Early signs and kind of what we're expecting as far as who will likely end up coming down for that tournament, likely going to be Lithuania or Hong Kong. There's also the potential of it being Belgium. We see Lithuania, the team recently promoted. We'll see what they can do at this year's tournament. So a huge opportunity for them to continue to stay up. But at the same time, in Estonia's case, you're likely going to end up seeing kind of Belgium, Hong Kong, Lithuania in next year's Division 3A tournament, where we'll see whether or not they are going to be able to continue their success. And after a pretty dominant performance at the Division 3B level, we'll see whether or not it's going to be able to carry over for the future tournaments. A huge opportunity there. We'll see, of course, whether or not that's going to be a potential upset as Estonia continues to climb through the ranks. A huge win from this year's tournament for them. Now it's just a matter of how far if they can keep it going into the Division 3A level. But you also look to some key players to kind of lead that charge. And a young Estonian team, and it's one of the biggest differences, I'd say, from their previous teams, is that this year they really had that kind of depth piece, that star talent to kind of get them over the edge. Alexandra Stolirova, the 18-year-old sensation, 14 goals at this tournament for Estonia, scoring kind of a third of the total goals that they needed. 6 assists for 20 points at this tournament. She was really that difference maker, if you will, to end up being that kind of getting Estonia over the edge. And so a huge tournament from her, an 18-year-old player that is now leading the Estonian team. You also look in net with Sofia Salamantina, the 19-year-old goaltender who picked up the 3 wins and really the 3 most important wins off the start against Israel, Bosnia, and South Africa, sporting a .972 save percentage and a 0.67 goals against average, with a shutout included in that stat as well. She had an amazing tournament, and it's going to be a huge part to this Estonian team if they want to continue going forward into this tournament. It's been a great run for them. Once again, finishing in the 41st overall spot, winning the Division 3B tournament, and now it's a matter of if they can continue that success into next year's Division 3A tournament. Then we go on to topic number 3. And for topic number 3, we have the group balancing at the Women's World Championships. And so you look at this and yes, right, we think back to 2012, when they first introduced the tiered format with the top 5 teams in Group A, the top 5 teams in Group B, or the next 5 teams rather in Group B, which we know as now, but we shift back to that time frame, and it was the top 4 teams in Group A, the next 4 teams over in Group B. And it was, I don't want to say a necessary adjustment, but it was one that was very much coming. And obviously, you have the 2 teams with Canada and the US dominant at that point in time, blowing weaker teams out and making the women's game extremely uncompetitive in a way that wasn't necessarily all that much fun to watch. But you could think flash forward a few years into the future, 2026 timeframe, they have officially gone away from that format. And I think, yes, it's very much needed. It's about time they've gotten rid of it. But at that point in time in 2012, they really did need it. And you think kind of the general format of that 8-team tournament, what it ended up meaning was the top 2 teams, Canada and the US, end up getting semifinal or quarterfinal byes. Then you have the next 4 teams, which was extremely competitive at that point in time as well, whether it be Switzerland, Russia, Finland, Sweden, were kind of your big 4, or your next 4, I guess, at that point in time. And so, yes, you did need it, and we saw kind of the battles in whether it be Group A and Group B within that 8-team tournament. And then when they finally expanded back in 2019 to the 10-team format, it became extremely difficult to pull off the Group B upset and find your way into Group A. And so there was a bit more of that kind of issue, and we saw a bit more of that contention point. The only time before that format was introduced that a team not named Canada or the US won was at the 2006 Olympics, where Sweden knocked off the US before Canada ended up beating them to win gold. And so there's still kind of a bit of a contention point as they move forward into those unstaggered standings, the snake format, whether or not those competitive games are going to still be able to take place. But I do think that this is a great step for the women's game to allow weaker teams to continue to get to play teams like Canada, teams like the US, and as well, and the other part I'll mention, and some people kind of forget, is they get to play teams like the Czechs, like the Swedes, like the Finns, like the Swiss in a regulated tournament where they don't need to go out and win a bunch of different games to end up getting into the eventual quarterfinal spot. They only need to win realistically one game, maybe two if something goes wrong at the tournament. And so it's a huge opportunity to continue to grow the game for weaker or kind of less strong countries, if you will, to be able to make the playoffs in these tournaments. And when they do eventually make the playoffs, not have a guaranteed written off result, whether you have to play Canada, the US, or the Czechs, the Finns, the Swiss in that Group A side. So yes, in many ways, it was definitely a huge, a great kind of step in the right direction for the IIHF to go back to the snake format for the women's world championships. But also you kind of look to, well, what kind of upsets have there been in the past with this format? And we'll start in 2012, where we kind of see a bit of that new shaping out to be. So for Group B, when they went to the 8-team top four in Group A, next four in Group B, we saw the Swiss defeat Russia and Finland to win the bronze medal back in 2012. Russia, as the 1 seed in Group B in 2013, beat Switzerland and Finland en route to win their bronze medal. 2014, Sweden beat Finland before losing to eventually come fourth in 2014. 2017 was one of the bigger upsets we saw, with Germany knocking off Russia, and they ended up losing in that bronze medal game to end up coming in the fourth spot. 2015, 2016, we saw no Group B upsets. 2018, 2019, when they eventually expanded to the 10-team format, we saw no upsets. COVID was 2020. There was no Women's World Championship that year. 2021, no Group B upset that year. And then we saw Russia depart the IIHF due to, of course, stuff happening outside the game of hockey. And that kind of opened the door for teams to jump up. And of course, we saw Japan end up replacing that Russian team. But then we saw kind of a bit of that dogfight to see who was going to be the next team up. The Czechs defeated Finland and Switzerland in 2022 en route to win the bronze medal. The Olympic Games that year, we did not see any Group B team upset. 2023, we saw Sweden knock off Japan in the 5-8 semifinal game for those placement rounds. So not necessarily all that impactful on the final tournament. 2024, no Group B upsets. 2025, no Group B upsets. And then the Olympic Games in 2026, which was the last edition of the staggered groups. Of course, the most recent Olympic Games, we did see Sweden knock off Czechia before losing to Switzerland in the bronze medal game, finishing fourth at that tournament. And so, yes, it's great to finally see, but now it's a matter of, well, what's to come, right? And for the Women's World Championships, having the door open for some of the weaker teams and teams that you might not necessarily think about, they now have the opportunity to pull off one big win a tournament and maybe find themselves in a quarterfinal game, or quite potentially for the case like teams like Czechia, teams like Finland, teams like Sweden, they might need that one big win against Canada to end up, or the US to end up sending both Canada and the US to play each other in that semifinal, where before you needed to beat both in order to come in that top spot to make them play each other. Now it's a matter of one win. And so we'll show now kind of those groups as to what's to come, coming off the most recent Women's World Championship final standings. Of course, you have the USA in the Group A, the number 1 seed, Canada and Finland, the number 2 and 3 seeds, Czechia and Switzerland with the 4 and the 5 seeds in Group A. Group B, we have Sweden and Japan, the 6 and the 7. Group A, Germany and Austria with the 8 and the 9. And then in Group B, and for Denmark in that with the 10th overall spot, the 2 promoted teams, Austria and Denmark. Of course, the gold medal winner in the U.S. from last year's Women's World Championship, as well as the Olympic Games. Canada, the silver medalist from that tournament, from both those tournaments, I guess. Finland, the Women's World Championship bronze medalist. Of course, we did see the Swiss end up replacing them, but it has no impact on the Women's World Championship final standings. But it does present a huge opportunity for some big upsets to come. We talked about it a little bit already, but especially, for teams like Finland and Sweden, where they might beat each other, they might be able to send teams like Canada, and as well for the Czechs with the U.S., where if they win that one game, very well could be the difference maker between only having to beat Canada or the U.S. once in that eventual gold medal game, or twice in the semis and then the gold. And so it does allow for definitely some better competition. And so we'll see whether or not there are going to be those big upsets coming in the future where one big win can really reshape the overall game. And we talked last week in our podcast about, what does it mean for the PWHL and what's the impact of the PWHL on the international game. You add that factor with the fact that now they're reshaping the groups. It's a huge opportunity for the game to continue to grow, and very excited, to say the least, to see what's to come for the Women's World Championship. With only one team relegated to the tournament, we'll likely see some of those bottom-feeding-ish teams end up finding their way up. So for teams like Austria and Denmark, recently promoted, it's not a death sentence back down. They will likely be able to stay up. Huge opportunity for the women's side. Great to see the Women's World Championship being as competitive as ever. And now it's just a matter of how far it can go with the new format. As now we shift to topic number 4. For topic number 4, we have, Canada is in danger. And for Canada in danger, yes, there are a few things I do want to talk about. And both the men's and the women's side, it's been a bit of a tough ride these last few years, as we'll start here in 2023 and coming off probably one of the better years we've seen in 22 with 3 gold medals and a silver. The year before that in 21 there was 3 golds and a silver in 21, with the COVID year as well, knocking out the women's U18 tournament. But in 2023 it was the continuation of Canadian dominance and probably one of the best results that we've seen from the Canadians in quite a few years. And we had 3 gold medals, a silver at the Women's World Championship, and a bronze medal at the men's U18 tournament. The World Championship, they won gold. The World Juniors, they won gold. And of course, the women's U18 tournament, they won gold in. Then to the 2024 tournament, where of course they won gold at the Women's World Championships, bronze at the women's U18 tournament. And then on the men's side, outside of the men's U18 tournament, where they did of course win gold, you had a 4th place finish at the men's world championships, losing to Switzerland in the semis, Sweden for that bronze medal game, and then the World Juniors, which was the beginning of the end for the Canadians, losing to the Czechs in the quarterfinal round. A bit more of that ugly type start for this Canadian team, which then transitioned into, you guessed it, 2025. And it was another one of those kind of tournaments where, yes, the Women's World Championships, the silver medal. The Women's U18 tournament, the gold medal. Where, yes, that was definitely a better type tournament for them. Women's Worlds losing the gold, not necessarily your favorite thing, but still right around where they should be. For the Women's U18 tournament, that number 1 win is a huge really win for them to continue their dominance at that tournament. But then you shift back to the men's side, and it was more disappointments at the big tournaments. Yes, they end up winning gold at the men's U18 tournament with a huge 7-0 win over the Swedes in a bit of a shocker too, I might say. And I wouldn't necessarily say that Canada was favored in any aspect of that game, but it's still kind of, you have to talk about, well, what does that mean for them moving forward, that they weren't even expected to win that tournament. They end up pulling through. It was great to see them take that tournament. But the other two big tournaments on the men's side, the World Juniors, which was probably one of the worst tournaments they've ever played on the World Junior side, losing to Latvia, and of course they end up losing to quite a few teams in between there with the US and the Czechs in that eventual quarterfinal round. And so that was a bit of a disappointment. And then you shift over to the Men's World Championships, where, of course, they end up losing to Denmark. And that loss to Denmark in that quarterfinal round was extremely disappointing for them. And they end up placing 5th at that year's tournament, which then, brings us around to, well, what happened in 2026 and maybe a little bit more that where that cause for concern comes in, where on the World Junior side, you have the bronze medal finish. And yes, you lose to the Czechs yet again in that semifinals, but whoop-de-doo, they end up coming out with the bronze. And they beat Finland in that bronze medal game, a bit of an iffy game at that, but still a disappointing result for them, especially with the team they had coming in. They were expected to be, at the very least, gold medal contenders. They didn't even get to that point. A disappointing result for them, coming in the 3rd spot, the bronze medal position at the World Junior Tournament. Then you go to the Women's U18 tournament, which I wouldn't say they were all that happy with either, losing to the Americans to end up taking the silver medal at that tournament. A real disappointing tournament for them as well. And yes, in our prediction, we did have the U.S. winning in that one. But still, when you come into those tournaments, you want to win gold and you kind of get in that gold or bust mentality. It becomes a bit more of that disappointing factor. And then there's no better tournament to talk about Canada in danger with. And, well, part of the reason why this is a topic of this week is, well, for Canada, they lost both the gold medal on the women's side at the Olympic Games and the men's side at the Olympic Games, coming second on both of those. And we'll talk more, we'll start, I guess, with the men's side. And for the men's side, look, I mean, they won the Four Nations tournament back in 2025. They didn't place all that well at the last Olympic Games, but NHL players weren't there, so we'll give them a pass from that perspective. Then you kind of look at, well, what's been coming at the World Championships. 2 pretty disappointing tournament finishes the last 2 years. 5th place, losing to Denmark in the quarters in 2025. And then, of course, that 4th place finish, Switzerland and then Sweden back in 2024. So that kind of disappointing aspect is there, and part of the reason why Canada continues to look as if they are in danger. And then the other is, well, what's coming behind it? You look at the World Junior Championships, and, well, they haven't looked all that good at that. They've lost to the Czechs in 2026, the most recent one in the semis. Of course, they've lost to the Czechs in 2025 on home ice in that quarterfinal round. 2024, where, of course, they lost in Sweden to the Czechs. And so it's been kind of that, well, that's a bit of a cause for concern there. The fact that you haven't necessarily seen them play at their best. Yes, they finally got a medal at the juniors, but it's not the medal that you expect coming from a Canadian team, especially with the dominance they'd shown in the years prior to that. And so for the Canadians, yes, the World Juniors is definitely a cause for concern for them, but then you shift to the men's U18 tournament, and that might be really the only redeemable factor for them. Obviously picking up golds in 2025, 2024, bronze in 2023. So really 3 straight years of medaling at this tournament, 2 of which I'd say were the medal that Canada really wanted coming into this tournament. And 2026 presents another opportunity for them to go far. I think kind of looking at it early, and obviously we'll be doing our team preview, prediction, and all of those fun aspects. But for the men's U18s, Canada is expected yet again to be at the very least gold medal contenders, if not favorites at that year's tournament or this year's tournament. So once again, a huge opportunity for them there to kind of rewrite the ship ahead of the Men's World Championships, which are in Switzerland this year. We'll see what's to come on that account. But still, a bit of a cause for concern early on for this Canadian team. Losing to the Americans, they have an aging core, and now it's a matter of, well, they have all the star talent in the world, but in the end, can they commit to a structure and actually play the way they're supposed to? Because it's been 3 years, or really back-to-back years now, with, of course, with the Four Nations, where frankly the Canadians got outplayed in both of their games, got bailed out by Binnington and net, and in the Olympic Games we kind of saw it was flipped around the other way, where Canada, on the men's side at least, ended up outplaying the Americans, but weren't able to get that final chance, and that was the difference maker in that game. So for Canada, on the men's side, I'd say yes, they are in a little bit of danger, but might not be as much as the women's side. And I'm going to present a video for those who watched our final recap on YouTube for the women's side of the Olympics. You probably have already seen this video, but at the same time, it does bear some repeating for our audio listeners. This is a conversation between myself and the current right after, of course, the women's Olympic final, where Canada ended up losing to the US. But this problem has been presenting itself for quite a while, and dating all the way back to the 2022 Olympic Games, 2022 Women's World Championships, the fact was that Canada was going to struggle into the future. They had an older team at that point in time. Yes, the PWHL was just sort of kicking up at that point. It was about to come into fruition. And now we see now, kind of 4 years later, the actual impact of it, just how much Canada ended up regretting not changing their decision on what they were supposed to do. So I'll show you this audio and visual clip now as to our thoughts on the women's state of Canadians women's hockey.
Hey everyone, this is On the Fly, and we do international hockey content, which means every 4 years we get to cover the Olympics. Today we're going to bring on a little trip down memory lane of what the Canadian National Women's Hockey Program has done over the last 4 years. Hey, 2022 Olympics, what does the future hold for this Canadian team?
Canada does have an advantage right now, but in 8 years, 12 years time, I don't think they're going to be where they are today. I think they are going to be in quite a world of hurt and might not even podium this in the 12 years.
Hey, 2022 Worlds, how's Canada looking?
And Canada, in my opinion, hasn't looked that good compared to some of the other teams. And like the Finns, in my opinion, are actually looking better than Canada is right now.
Okay, 2024 Worlds, how's the US looking?
There's a big tournament coming up in about 2 years. You know, it's something you might have heard of it. I might have heard of it. It's something called, the Olympics. It's kind of a big event. And from what I've seen with the way that the U.S. is structured this year, that is their objective. They're not trying to win this year's tournament. They're trying to build some chemistry to win the big one. The one that happens every 4 years, the gold medal in the Olympics.
Interesting. 2025, how's the team looking?
For this Canadian team, it was a disappointment. They're just looking a little sluggish, like we saw a little bit at last year's Women's Worlds, as well as this year's Women's Worlds, where they kind of looked a little bit out of it at times.
Hey, 2026, how's the gap closed between these two teams?
Their success against the Canadian team at the Rivalry series, they outscored them 24-7.
But surely they changed their roster, right?
You can look at the Rivalry series, where it was a lot of the same team that we're seeing now.
Not good. How'd they fare in their first game against the U.S.?
Wasn't there for the Canadians today. They didn't have, any defense that were really working well. Their forwards weren't great. Their goaltending kept them in it. Desbiens looked pretty good, all things considered. But for the U.S., they are just that much better of a team at this tournament.
Oh no. And today?
And that will be dumped around the boards. Canada breaks up 2-on-1. Stacey, over to O'Neill. Alone. Scores! Kristen O'Neill puts Canada on the board shorthanded, and Canada will lead this one 1-0. We might just have ourselves a game. Woo-hoo. Maybe, just maybe, there might be a chance. Cycles along the point. Keller walks with it. Edwards. Tregs. Scores! No. And tipped in front. And the U.S. ties the game. And who else? Who else but Hillary Knight to do it? As Megan Keller now works in. Oh, and a great move by Keller. All alone. And scores. And the U.S. wins it. Megan Keller. All alone. And the U.S. wins 2-1.
Well, I guess it really is the hope that kills you.
So yes, the overall state of the Women's Canadian National Program has been, let's say, a kind of expected coming into this tournament, and it was part of the issue coming in was, well, we've seen what happened at the Rivalry series, so we knew what was to come, right? And I wouldn't necessarily say that it was all that surprising, just how badly Canada ended up getting beaten really at that point. But you look at it, yes, it's been a bit of a tough sled for this Canadian team coming into this tournament. By far underdogs. They get blown out by the U.S. in the prelims, and then we see them kind of battling back. And in that final game, they gave you a little bit of hope. And that was kind of the end, was it really is the hope that kills you. Because, coming to that game, you were hoping that they kept it respectable. They lead through most of that game. Of course, Hillary Knight, with a game-tying goal, ends up making it really exciting, but in the end, a little bit too little, too late. Unfortunately for Canada, they don't get their gold medal in the game that finally matters. But this loss has been one that has been a bit of an issue from the very start. You think back the last few years at the Women's World Championships, and yes, they win gold back in 2024, but 2025, a second place finish, 2023, a second place finish, and we even think back to that 2024 tournament where the U.S. went with a much younger approach because they weren't necessarily playing for that World Championship, they were playing for the big one, right? And they were playing for that Olympic Games, and so even now, you see the impact of it, right? And you see it in their age category, right? And you see it with Canada with the average age of 29.2 years of age versus the US where it's 25.8. And that's a huge gap of 3.4 years that we saw on the ice, especially in that opening game, but also towards the end of it where it's the speed factor, right? It's the skill factor, it's the strength factor, where, yes, you have a bit more of that clutch side where you've been there, you've done that, especially on the biggest stage at the Olympic Games, but you look up and down Canada's roster, and now the question becomes, well, for the next 4 years tournament, and this is kind of what we talked about on the 2022 Olympic Games, and it's the joy of doing content for that long as you can draw from it, is that, well, Canada, quite frankly, isn't going to have the same roster they had at that point, which they carried forward the majority of it into this tournament. In that year's tournament, in 2030, we might not see Anne-Renee Desbiens, Amaranth Smashmeyer, likely not going to be there. They're starting to get up there in age as far as hockey goes. You also look up and down the Canadian lineup. Marie-Philippe Poulin, probably not going to be there. Natalie Spooner, Sarah Nurse, kind of around that spot as well. And so you get to that stage where it's, well, at what point Brianne Jenner is another one, and you can keep going down the list, right? And it's kind of up and down with this Canadian roster. It's a bit of a disappointment factor because you don't really know, right? And it's part of the problem really with this tournament is for Canada, at what point is it going to be too much for them? Should be interesting to say the least. I mean, for the men's side, we kind of talked about it. Not necessarily as much panic, but on the women's side, the really only redeemable factor they have is their performance at the Women's U18 tournament. Obviously, 3 golds in the last 5 years, but a disappointing second place finish at the U18s this year. They've already lost to the Americans on the Women's World Championship side, so they need to kind of outperform them in terms of their depth. We'll see what's to come. Obviously, the addition of the PWHL is a huge opportunity, especially for Canadian-born talent. But in the same respect, the game's growing on the American side too, with the introduction of the PWHL. So it is a bit of that kind of trade-off there. We'll see what's to come. But in the end, Canada is in quite a bit of danger here on the men's side, and in particular on the women's side, where they might not be the top two teams over the next few Women's World Championship tournaments. Something to definitely keep an eye on there. But that will do it for our Canada is in danger, and we'll move over now to the NHL Global Series. And for the NHL Global Series, a huge announcement made just the other day by the NHL that they have announced that the Germany will be hosting the NHL Global Series from December 18th and 20th in the PSD Barn Dome in Dusseldorf, Germany. And so it's a huge opportunity there to continue to grow the game. It's been a bit of a tough ride so far for the German team, really at all the top level IIHF tournaments, but at the same time the game is growing, and so we'll show now. Obviously, we'll start it with the World Juniors, the first tournament of the international year, where they did have a 9th place finish at the World Junior tournament. Nearly got relegated for the second year in a row, but fortunately for them, end up climbing their way back, which was a huge win for them to stay up yet another year at this tournament. But you also look to, well, what's the women's side look like? And the Division 1A, they just ended up winning that tournament, getting the promoted spot to the top division for next year's Women's U18 tournament, replacing the Finns, the Finns did get relegated from the top division at the Women's U18 tournament, their first relegation at a IIHF top division event in program history, and so a huge problem really, and the first sign of a red flag for them there. But the U18 level, Germany did end up earning their promotion, so a huge accomplishment for them on that account. And then a bit more of the disappointing factor yet again. A 7th place finish at the Women's Olympic Games. Not necessarily all that much of a disappointment, but really more so just they've been kind of stuck in that position for quite a few years now. Haven't really been able to make that next big move up. We'll see whether or not that U18 level success will continue to translate into the top division tournaments. Definitely something to keep an eye on there. But then, of course, the men's Olympic Games, where I'd say it was yet another disappointing performance for them. They had every opportunity in their toolbox to end up making it into kind of that playoffs round of the Olympic Games. They end up losing to the Slovaks in that quarterfinals, despite being kind of favored. I'd say it was definitely one of those coin flip type games, but for the Germans, it was definitely a bit of that disappointing factor. And so we'll see whether or not it's going to be able to encourage the next group of players that end up rising up through the German program, because right now it is in a little bit of a chaos type mode. I think back to the most recent U18 on the men's side, 6th place finish at the 2025 tournament, Men's World Championships, a 9th place finish in 2025, and the Women's Worlds, an 8th place finish at that tournament, one spot away from the relegation. So for Germany, yes, right? And you want to continue to win games, you want to continue to put on good performances, but for a team like the Germans, where they need a little bit of that spark, they're hoping that this NHL Global Series might be that spark to end up leading to a new string of German prospects throughout both the men's and the women's side. You couple that with the fact that the Germans will also be hosting the Men's World Championship in 2027. There's definitely an investment there that you can see kind of coming to fruition. We'll see whether, of course, there is going to be that impact on the German game and really how long it takes them to end up getting to that point, because the Germans on a bit of a decline these last few years. Yes, you have star talent over in the NHL. Tim Stützle, Leon Draisaitl are two players that I'd say and Moritz Seider, I guess you could say, is the third, who are kind of those big three that you think about when you think of German hockey. But at the same time, they're looking for that expansion to continue to grow. Yes, you have the Dell League, which is a pretty good league as well. But at the same time, you're looking for that best on best to really inspire the next growth of that next growth of hockey for them. They are obviously hoping that the NHL Global Series coming to them will be that kind of next big moment in the grand scheme of German hockey. Not to mention as well that the Hockey Day in Germany did just wrap up over this past weekend, Friday and Saturday, March 13th and 14th, which was a bit of an interesting one too. And I'd say for the Germans, trying their best to really kind of grow the game. We'll see whether or not that's going to be able to be something that they can do over the next few years, especially with the NHL Global Series coming to Germany and Dusseldorf. We'll see whether or not they're going to be able to kind of achieve some of that success that has been kind of slipping through their fingers over the last few years. But that will do it for our Germany talk with the NHL Global Series. We'll now shift over to the Trans-Tasman series. And for this tournament, it was a bit more of that kind of interesting type tournament where you look at it for really both these teams, for Australia and New Zealand. It's been a bit of that kind of dominant factor these last few years. And for those who don't know what this tournament is, it's a kind of a friendly type tournament between New Zealand and Australia. It's a 3-game series between these two teams, and the winner doesn't really get anything except for pride. But it's kind of been a tournament to really try and grow the game. Two countries not necessarily known for their hockey, but really looking to try and grow it. And so Australia has dominated this tournament over the last many years. You kind of look back to the last 5 tournaments since the COVID break in 2022. Australia did end up winning 3-0 in that one. 2023, Australia won 3-0 as well. 2024, they split 2-1 win for Australia. There was 2 overtime games in there. Australia took one of them. New Zealand took the other. And then in 2025, Australia once again ended up taking that tournament with the 3-0 win. And then, of course, this year, where they look to try and kind of make a mark yet again at this tournament. For New Zealand, coming into this tournament, they were looking to kind of find their way back. And they hadn't won a game since, of course, 2024, where they split one of those. That win was in overtime as well. But it really has been dominated by Australia over the last several years. Even further back, New Zealand has won this tournament twice. Australia won the inaugural one back in 2017. Then they broke for 2020, 2021, before eventually returning for the 2022 tournament. And so talking about this tournament, we'll start here on the opening day. And it was a 5-4 win for New Zealand in this game. Fairly much a goaltending battle early here. But a game of responses, right? And you look at this game, it was one of those games I'd say that you want to kind of have back if you're the Australians. Each goal kind of got replaced by another one. And you kind of look early on in this game, New Zealand ties the game 1-1. And then you have 2 minutes and 25 seconds later, Australia finds that goal. 18 seconds later, New Zealand ties the game at 2. Then New Zealand goes up 3-2. 7 seconds later, Australia scores the tying goal. And it was kind of that back and forth type game that we were expecting, I'd say, in many ways from these two teams. But at the same time, you were expecting Australia to end up getting that goal, building momentum and continuing that down the line. They didn't necessarily get that in that first game. And in this one, yes, New Zealand ends up taking it 5-4, your final, their first win at this tournament since 2024. So a big accomplishment for them, really. And it sounds kind of weird, but the fact that they hadn't necessarily won in quite a while against this Australian team, who has been on the climb these last few years, a huge win for them as they continue to look success-bound into the future as far as those who do enjoy their shots on goal. In this game, it was 30 shots for New Zealand to 32 for Australia, so Australia did end up leading that shot count. But at the same time, definitely one that could have went either way in the opener. And then we shift over to game number 2 of this tournament, which is, once again, for the Aussies, you needed a win, right? And it was kind of those, if you want to win the series, you got to get a win. And so for Australia, a bit more of that kind of desperation type factor in this one, that we really saw them outplay this New Zealand team. And so first goal, as far as for the Aussies was a bit more that kind of unfortunate type goal. And we saw the first game be a bit more that goaltending battle early on. This game, we saw the New Zealand goaltender try his best to keep them in it, but in the end, the Aussies were just a little bit too much for him. And so it was a pretty low angle shot goal, one that he's definitely going to want back from behind the goal line that bounced in off his pad. So an unfortunate start to this game for the New Zealand for the Kiwis here, but luckily for Australia, they got another goal right after that with a breakaway. Then we saw kind of late into this game a screenshot goal to make it 3-0 for the Australians, and from there kind of took it away. If they get the late goal on the power play, and even that goal I wouldn't say necessarily was all that impactful for them. They do collect the 4-0 victory unfortunately for New Zealand. Just couldn't survive as long as they would have wanted to, kept in it for as long as they could, but in the end, the Aussies were just a little bit too much for them. A 4-0 win for Australia over New Zealand, which then brought us on to today's games and this morning's games, and I guess for Australia, would have been yesterday's games, but you look at it for the Aussies in this one. It was a 6-1 win for the Aussies in dominant fashion. It was a pretty blowout type game, and Sasha Rapchuk with 4 goals in this one and 1 assist really led the way for this Australian team. And you think about what it means, right? And it's another win against a rival type team at New Zealand. You know of the previous rivalries, and it's kind of rivalry week on this channel. It's part of the joy, right? And so a huge win for the Aussies. They pick up the 6-1 win in this game, led by a 5-point performance by Rapchuk. And even late, right? We saw New Zealand kind of put on a little bit of pressure, but in the end, the Aussies, with their lead already in place, just a little bit too little, too late for them. They end up taking this game 6-1 your final. They end up winning the Trans-Tasman series by a win of 2-1, and so big congrats to them. They will pick up their 5th straight win at this tournament since the COVID break, but of course New Zealand did take the 2 terms before that in 2018 and 2019. They will improve to 6-2 all time at this tournament. And so once again, huge congrats to Australia on winning the Trans-Tasman series. Looking forward to seeing what they can do, really both those teams can do at the upcoming Men's World Championships. Should definitely be exciting to say the least. We'll now shift over to our last topic of today and our headliner. And that is the biggest rivalries on the IIHF side. And so for the IIHF, obviously, international hockey in general, whether it be IIHF sanctioned, whether or not be, has been competitive for the last however many years, right? And we've seen teams have rivalries, lose rivalries, but in the end, there's some that, especially now and more in the present day, we see become ever so much more prevalent. And we'll start here with, as far as the rivalry goes, with a few honorable mentions. And in our honorable mentions, we're going to have some more of the historical ones, not necessarily as impactful now, but very well could reshape itself into the future. Obviously, Canada and Russia, 2 teams that go very far back. Of course, when the Russians were also called the Soviet Union. We've seen a little bit less of that rivalry now, especially with Russia not being allowed to play. But at the same time, yes, Russia is definitely a team with Canada that has been a rivalry for the last however many years. We think back to the Summit Series in 72, the Canada Cup in 87, the Punch-Up in Piestany in 1987. And so quite a well-documented rivalry between these 2 teams. We've seen the nastiness continue throughout the 2010s, especially kind of late into that 2010s, where every gold medal game and really kind of high-level competition game, we ended up seeing the Canadians face off against the Russians. And so it was a bit of that more historical one, but still one that I'd say definitely a rivalry to remember. The USA and Russia, the Cold War. Obviously, you can think back to the 1980 Miracle on Ice, which would have been the last time we saw the U.S. win gold at the Olympic Games. not necessarily now, as obviously the U.S. did just win this past year. But obviously, USA-Russia, a well-historied rivalry as well, one that dates back quite a few years now as well. More that historical type rivalry, not necessarily as prevalent now with Russia not being in it, but still USA and Russia, two very good teams that have shown themselves to be good on the international stage. Quite the rivalry there. And then the final one between Czechia and Slovakia, two teams that obviously they were the split, right? And it used to be called Czechoslovakia following the departure of the Soviet Union. And so for the Czechs, it's been one that they haven't necessarily been as competitive over the last few years. The Slovaks really grown their game over the last little while, but the Czechs still kind of dominate this rivalry here. And so as much as, yes, they are a good rivalry, yes, they have a lot of history with one another, not necessarily right now, in my eyes at least, that kind of rivalry type factor that we're used to seeing at the top division. And so for me, they don't end up on the top 5 ranking for the overall tournament. Which then leads us on to team number 5. And for matchup number 5. And for matchup number 5, we have Canada and the Czechs. And this is one that I'd say in many ways has haunted me as a Canadian fan over the last however many years. Obviously, you look back over the last several, the rise of the Czech program, both on the men's and the women's side, has been instrumental to watch. And it's been really impressive to see just how far this Czech team has come. And really, you think to the World Juniors, right? With 3 straight World Juniors eliminations for the Czechs knocking out Canada. But in the same token, we've also seen Canada knock out the Czechs for the last several before that. And so 8 of the 12 elimination matchups, not just on the World Junior side, but also the men's worlds, the women's worlds, the men's and women's U18 tournament, and of course the World Juniors. The last 12 tournaments, 8 of them have had elimination matchups with Canada taking on the Czechs. And so it's a huge opportunity for them each and every time they play, because for the Czechs, they look to upset Canada. For Canada, they've been looking, especially as of late, just to try and hold on against this team. The Czechs, a very, very good program. They've been growing, not just on the men's side, but on the women's side in particular, where on the women's side, we've seen the rise, of course, of the women's Czech program. And they've become ever so much closer to knocking off teams like Canada. And I really do think it's only a matter of time. Might be this tournament, might be in the tournaments in the future, that they end up taking down the Canadian team. Something to definitely keep an eye on there, especially for the Czech program that continues to grow. And we've seen a lot of star talent move over to the PWHL. Huge opportunity there for the Czechs to continue to grow, not just now, but into the future, and eventually take down Canada. And so it's quite the rivalry between Canada and the Czechs, one that I expect to be ever so much more prevalent into the future. Definitely one to keep an eye on there. Then we go to the fourth seed, and this is one that might not be your more common one, but this is one that I'd say, especially on the men's side, 2 teams that have had a date with one another for quite a while now. And for Germany, for Latvia, you look at the World Junior Tournament in particular, 2 teams that have always really been that kind of fighting for relegation spot. And 2024, 2025, the loser of their game ends up going to the relegation game. Unfortunately for Germany, that was them twice. Then you look to the Olympic Games, of course, where Germany ends up losing to Latvia, which actually ended up helping them in the end. But unfortunately for the Latvians, couldn't quite get the goal to put them over the edge. They got that extra goal against the Danes. They would have taken over Germany's spot. Very could have likely ended up finding themselves into the semifinals at that tournament. And then from there, you really never know what's to come. But it has been a really competitive matchup through the years. Think to the Olympic Games, yes, they lose. But for Germany, they also won in a blowout fashion at the 2024 Men's World Championships. And this matchup always and probably will always be a matchup of offense versus defense, where you have the best players and the star talent of the Germans who can't necessarily match up to the defensive structure of the Latvian team. And so, yes, it's been quite a ride for the Latvians over the last few years. Obviously, they've grown their juniors program in particular significantly. We've seen that impact, of course, beating Canada and almost beating Canada in this past World Junior Tournament. For the Germans, they've been a sort of a steady force over the last several tournaments, but unfortunately for them, just haven't quite been able to find that next gear up. And so for Germany, for Latvia, a rivalry that continues to grow in each and every tournament that it sees. They get ever so much closer. Been quite the matchup, to say the least. Then we move on to the third rivalry, my third favorite rivalry that we have, with Czechia and Switzerland. And for the Czechs and the Swiss, it's been kind of a dogfight type battle, right? And you think about it with the men's side, the women's side as well, where both these programs have kind of grown together. And for the Swiss, obviously the Swiss have been a team that have been kind of a storied franchise, teams that have been competitive throughout the years. And really for the Czechs, it's been that growth as well, but we've seen it really pick up over the last few years. We've seen quite the rivalry, especially at the Men's World Championships, where it has gone back and forth. Of course, the Czechs ended up beating the Swiss for the gold medal back in 2024, but really can go either way, and it's part of the joys of these tournaments, is that just because you win one doesn't mean you're going to win all of them. And we saw that at the most recent Olympic Games, where, of course, Switzerland ended up beating the Czechs, a huge win for them, and that ended up helping them get a bit of an easier seed against the Finns. Unfortunately for them, couldn't quite find their way through for the Czechs, nearly knocking off Canada. Unfortunately fell up just a little bit short in that game. It's been quite the rivalry between these two teams, but you look at the Swiss, look at the Czechs, two teams growing rapidly throughout these tournaments. And now it's just a matter of how much further this rivalry can continue to grow, especially as you look at the upcoming Men's World Championships, where, of course, the Men's World Championships, that's going to be another opportunity to see Czechia taking on the Swiss, probably in a meaningful game as well, where most likely, depending on what happens in the NHL, depending on which players come over, you will see some of the best players on the Czechs and on the Swiss over at that tournament. Very exciting, to say the least, see how far this Czech and Swiss team can go. They can continue to add another step in their long, storied rivalry between these two teams. Then we go to one that I'd say most people were anticipating, and I haven't looked at our chat yet, but I would assume that this rivalry is one that most people would say is number one or number two. And I think you can put it one or two, whichever way you want. I'm going to put Sweden and Finland at the number two spot for the best rivalry in international hockey. You think back, kind of storied rivalry, right? And it has been a pretty close battle all time. Since 1952, Sweden leads the record, 64 wins, 58 losses, and 9 ties or draws. And so it's kind of always been that battle, right? It's the classic battle of offense versus defense. And for me, I mean, you cover these tournaments enough, right? You always know what's to come between the Swedes and the Finns. And the men's side has been one that's been a battle forever. And there's no better way to really talk about this one than let's hear from the players. And so I'm going to show you a clip that we took back at the Four Nations Face-Off, where we interviewed Elias Lindholm for Black and Gold Productions. And so I'll show you this clip now as to what it means for Elias Lindholm to play in a Sweden-Finland rivalry game at that tournament.
Yeah, it's always good games. I think, cross path with a lot of Finns. Huge respect for them, but there's always something there when we played against each other that had a little extra. But like this short tournament, all the games are going to be special. So I mean, my memories has been both good and bad, but yeah, the World Junior final loss is still going to be one that going to be there forever.
So yes, right, it's been kind of that little brother versus big brother type rivalry, and it's always been that kind of way with these two teams. It's been great to see over the years just how competitive this tournament has gotten and the way that these two teams interact with each other. but it's always been one of the toughest type battles between the Finns and the Swedes. Normally ends up being one of the most important games. So part of the joys of these tournaments is, well, it comes down to which of these teams ends up on top. Finland and Sweden, always a storied rivalry. Offense versus defense, big brother versus little brother. And in the end, and the Swedes, as of now, currently lead that matchup on the men's side, but not necessarily for that much longer. But where it really starts to get interesting is on the women's side, where we've seen the rise of the Swedish program in the last few years. The Finns have always been kind of leaders on the women's side as well. And so we've seen them kind of catch up to one another. It's been great to see these two teams kind of find their way back in. And now it's just a matter of, well, how far can they really go? And it's exciting to see for the Swedes, for the Finns, and we'll see whether or not they're going to be able to continue that dominance really into the future, especially being the number one and number two. You could argue, the number one and number two teams at some of these international tournaments. Exciting to see what's to come. Sweden-Finland, one of the best rivalries, the number two rivalry on our rankings, the best European one. But in the end, I think there's no better one, especially right now, than Canada and the USA. And you think of this matchup, it's one that has been historied. Obviously, Canada and the US are neighbors as well. But especially as of late, we've seen the rise, of course, of Canada and the US on the big stage, the Olympic game gold medals on both the men's, the women's side, the Paralympics as well, which just concluded today, where we saw Canada take on the US for gold. The US ended up taking that one as well, so a bit of a tough ride for Canada at these Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, but it also extends far beyond just, well, the US taking on Canada on the hockey side. You can kind of tailor it across the board, where they are very close in a lot of different sports. And for Canada and for the US, the hockey side has always been a competitive one. And you think back, however many years you want to go back, we'll start, of course, in 1987 on the women's side, where you kind of look to the record as of right now, with Canada leading up 106 wins, 88 losses, and 1 draw, whether that be at the Rivalry Series, the Women's World Championships, Olympics, Four Nations Cup, etc. They've always been a competitive one at the top division of these tournaments. And we tend to see Canada and the US on the women's side duking it out for gold each and every year. Unfortunately for the US, kind of fallen themselves on the wrong side of things in history, but fortunately for them now, finding themselves on the right side of it. Obviously, Women's World Championship in 2025, gold medal at the Olympic Games in 26, gold medal at the Women's U18 tournament in 2026 as well. And so really kind of finding their way back as far as the women's side goes and making it all so much more competitive. Obviously, history definitely favors Canada, but now we're starting to see the U.S. really pick it up. Probably one of the most dominant tournament performances we've seen at an Olympic Games in history. The U.S. knocking off Canada for gold, 2-1 win in overtime. But then, of course, you can also shift it not only to the women's side, but also the men's side. And at the men's side, it's been very much dominated by Canada for the last several years, really dating back quite a ways back. But at the same time, part of the joy of it is, well, what point does it mean that the U.S. is going to battle their way back? And we've seen the U.S. come back these last few years and really become a problem for teams like Canada. And we've seen it whether it's at the Olympic Games, whether it's at the Men's World Championships, whether it's at the World Juniors, right, where we saw, of course, the U.S. knock off Canada last year, 2025's World Junior Tournament, which ended up sending them against a real tough Czech team. And so, yes, right, and it's part of the joys of these tournaments is you tend to look for those big rivalry games to end up resulting in gold medals, and we've been seeing that lately on the men's side in particular, where the US and Canada have always been around each other as far as those gold medal game rematches go, but it's become ever so much more prevalent. That's part of the main reason why, at least in my eyes, that they are number one and number two, because really on both sides, the men's and the women's, we see that rivalry be the gold medal game so very often, where, you know, teams like the Swedes, teams like the Finns are normally battling for that third and fourth spot, where Canada and the US much more that top two bracket. So for Canada, for the U.S., they are going to be my number top rivalry in international hockey. Second spot is Sweden against the Finns. Still a very good one. It hurt me to put them below Canada and the U.S., but especially after these Olympic Games, just finds them a little bit lower down. Switzerland and the Czechs in the third spot. Germany and Latvia in the fourth spot. Canada and Czechia in the fifth spot. Then to our honorable mentions with Canada and Russia, the USA and Russia, and Slovakia and Czechia. Which then brings us over to our live questions. And so if you do have any questions, please do leave them in the chat box below, where we'll answer your live questions, whether it be about any of our topics today, or whether it be just about international hockey in general. Obviously want to hear your thoughts and kind of hear what people have to say about today's program, or if it's just about the general tournament in general. Raindrops on the windowsill says Sweden, Finland, and it's not even close, and that is very fair. Obviously, I didn't want to be the one that it hurt me to put Canada as the number one. But in the end, I do think that Canada is just the better team, or the better rivalry with the U.S. Sweden, Finland, still a very historic rivalry, one of the best rivalries in all of international sports. But Canada and the U.S., especially as of late, for me, just kind of takes that cake a little bit more. Canada, Czechia is almost like Serbia and Switzerland in soccer, albeit without the Kosovo issue hanging about. That's fair. And I think part of it too is like, you think about just how far that rivalry has come over the last several years. It's been one of the better rivalries really since the beginning. And so it's great to see. It's always great to see international hockey continue to get more and more competitive. Very much enjoyed that, just how far they've come. But Canada and the Czechs, two teams, very storied rivals. And now it's just a matter of, well, which team kind of finds their way through. And it's really exciting to see just how far the Czechs have come and become kind of that next team up, right? And you look at teams like Latvia as well, who've been on the rise. You have the teams that have already been kind of established with the Slovaks, with the Germans, with really the rest of them, because they've all had some pretty good performances over the years. And so very interesting to see, to say the least. Uzbekistan rising fast both in soccer and hockey. They really are, right? And I can't say as much for the soccer part, but really on the rise these last few years on the hockey side. Some huge improvements and investments into their sports. And it's great to see just how far they've came, really on both sides of the agenda, both soccer, I guess, as well, and hockey on the men's side. It's been impressive to see their rise, and now it's just a matter of how much farther can they really go at these tournaments. I know Belarus is inactive, but Latvia and Belarus have a deep history. They do, right? And that's another team that, I mean, if I had more honorable mentions, I'd probably put them in. But especially right now, you think about kind of their rivalry in the grand scheme of things, not necessarily as impactful on the top division tournaments right now. And yes, when Belarus and Russia end up being reinstated, I do think that they will likely they'll likely reignite that rivalry. But in the end, Latvia with Germany, I think, is a pretty good rivalry right now, especially with what we've seen. Canada and the Latvians have had their own rivalry over the last few years at the World Juniors, but not necessarily enough to get them to that point. So take that kind of as you will. I do think that, once again, though, Belarus still in Latvia, still two teams that are that rivalry type factor, but unfortunately right now just can't necessarily put them as the best rivalries in international hockey, with everything with the fact that Belarus isn't even in the IIHF as of right now. Hello, Johnny here. I feel like with NHL rivalries, some are which are kind of forced because of divisions. Do you agree? I think part of that is true. I think you kind of look the original 6 rivalries where you kind of have the big 3 with Boston, Toronto, and Montreal. They all don't necessarily like each other. I think that's definitely part of it as to why those rivalries are so intense. And yes, you end up playing them quite a bit, but it's also location, right? And that's part of where the divisions kind of find themselves, is you kind of look at the best rivalries across all of sports, and they're all around the same place. And that's why fans get so into it, is because they can travel to each other's arenas and they can do that sort of stuff with Toronto, Montreal, and Boston in particular. Or you look at Tampa and Florida, or you look at kind of the other teams around the league. Those rivalries exist because of locations, part of it, but also just the fact that they play each other so often that kind of hatred comes out. And we see that as well, right, with the top rivalries across international hockey, where you have Canada and the U.S., you have Canada and the U.S. neighbors with each other, Sweden and Finland, which I'd say are the two probably best rivalries in all of international sports. They are neighbors with each other. They play each other a lot in big games. And so that's part of the reason why, especially on the NHL side as well, we tend to see teams in the same division, teams in the same conference, have that kind of long historic rivalry. And so, yes, I do agree. I think part of that is due to the divisions. I think part of it is due to location, and part of it is history as well. So it's kind of a combination of those three things. If you look at football, soccer, sometimes when there are rivalries that haven't happened for years, when it finally comes up, fans are really up for it more than ever. And that's true as well. And I think you see that quite a bit as well with some of the other divisions as well. And especially on the lower side, of course, there's a few teams in there that have that long, historic hatred for one another that comes out on the ice. And so I think as much as you might not see them all the time, I think when Russia eventually comes back, you're going to see that kind of rivalry reignite with teams like Canada, like the US, like the Finns, like the Swedes, where they've been so good for so long and kind of waiting in the wings. I think the Czechs as well are another team in there that you're waiting for to kind of see just how much of a rivalry factor that will be. And so, yeah, I think part of that is you wait long enough, the hatred still remains. And then it's just a matter of, well, you're going to come out and play your best. So it's exciting to see, especially the international side with all the rivalries that have been coming up over the last few years. But that is going to wrap it up for episode number 3 of the On the Fly International Hockey Podcast. A huge thank you to everyone who hung out with us live in the chat today, and for those listening over on the audio version of the program. If you enjoyed the breakdown of the lower division and the state of international hockey, make sure you've hit that subscribe button on YouTube and turned on notifications so you never miss a live stream. For our listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, please give us a follow and a 5-star rating, which helps us grow into one of the biggest hockey podcasts out there. Don't forget to follow us at OnTheFly1515 on Instagram, X, and TikTok for highlights and news throughout the week. I am your host, Parker McLean, and until next time, see ya.